So I was saying, Ryan, I love you, man, and just forgive me for not being the chirpy, cheeky chappy that everyone knows me to be. I just had a bit of a downer day yesterday, so I'm picking myself up. And the thing is, I know part of what they've done to me, the process as a punishment, is to sap your energy, to cause financial ruin, to put a strain on your marriage and relationship, to make you just go bankrupt, and really not be productive in any way. Just be a negative force. Just really. But it's good to know that, because then you can fight against it. If that makes sense. And
yeah,
last night I was saying I rested my head on my wife's chest, and I asked her to just hold me, and I sobbed like a baby. I think part of it is to accept that you're down and you're sad, and to embrace it. There's no point trying to bottle it up. And there's no point trying to be, I'm macho, I'm the man. I didn't feel like it last night. I felt very vulnerable and very scared about my future. I am financially ruined. My career is over. My wife asked me, like, would you have still done this, a year ago if you knew this was going to happen to us? Because unfortunately, that's the thing. It has massive repercussions on my home life and my family and my kids,
Right.
Thinking, cutting back everything, cutting back things that the kids used to do, the after school clubs, thinking about the presents we're going to get them, just all the changes in our life so that we can just survive. And even then, it's so scary because I just don't know what's around the corner. But anyway, enough of me. You were going to tell me about all the stuff you've been through.
I just want to comment on that, though, man. It makes me physically upset. Like, I have a physical reaction when I hear something like that. And this is sadly, this is a story people are familiar with today, and it's like, and that's the whole point. They want people to know this will happen to you if you dare to challenge the empire, right? I mean, and this is publicly, it's obvious, and so it's in one way. It's there's a little bit of a silver lining because it's showing people their true face, what they're really capable of and what they really are. But it's just so depressing to see how obvious that is and how willing they are to destroy everything to hide this, and failing to hide the obvious reality around specifically these injections, but so many other things. But it just makes me mad, man. So I feel for you, and I'm sorry you have to be going through that for doing the right thing, obviously. But from my perspective, as we were briefly saying before we started, is I understand where somebody like you is coming from in this with the job aspect, but I haven't gone through that part of it. My job is this and doing this part of it where I've been censored and attacked and suppressed so many times I can't even count. But so the idea of losing your entire career that you've built up because of that is just, it's unbelievable to me. But from my perspective, I have been from the very beginning, like, and I mean like long before I was ever really making an impact. It was a tiny little thing. I remember talking about certain things. It was primarily around cannabis law reform, as people know, as a long time. That's where I kind of started this when I was still feeling out what I was going to do. And I within like probably the first 6 months, I was kicked off of Google AdSense, which I still look back on as a blessing in disguise, because at that time I was brand new to this. I didn't know what was going, affiliates, advertising. I didn't know how. I wasn't even of the mind that this was meant to make profit at that point. I was like just starting something because I was passionate about it. Same. And then, why not try to make this something I can do? Dude, sorry, there's a little bit of delay, so I can't really go ahead.
No, I was going to say exactly the same with me. I built this not for a business. This was my little hobby, my way of fighting back against the system.
Right.
I never once thought this was going to be my career. Can you just tell me, Ryan, though, when did you actually start all this? Like, how far back are we talking about?
Well, it depends on, so like from the original impetus of what became what we are today. I mean, that's over a decade ago. I'm trying to remember the exact date. It was, so, I had basically, I left my career for the most part, and I was traveling in my RV with a friend of mine. And this was at a point where, I'm a chef. I classically trained with the Culinary Institute of America, Napa Valley. I've had, been anything from a general manager to a executive chef. And so I loved what I did, but there was just something missing, and at this time, especially, it was where I was already picking up on a lot of the political, realizing for the first time in my life that the news is lying to you, to put it as simple as possible, and I'm like, something's wrong here. And I just decided to start this random website because actually my buddy started some sports related thing. And I said, oh, that sounds like it might be fun. Just didn't ever intend for it to be what it is today. And that was a long time ago. For a long while, it was a, random like blog.com little site about cannabis stuff. And it was just, I have no idea what I was doing. And then, years later, we revamped the website, and still it was only like written articles and different things. And I don't think really until I started the daily wrap up, which was my daily, or best I can daily show, which everyone's familiar with today, that really kind of turned this. And at that point, that already brought on, I think, Whitney and then, and Derek, and I started bringing people in, and then, it just became what it is today.
It's amazing. No, and it is amazing, and Whitney's, she's a force, isn't she? She's a powerhouse.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about Whitney is just the disdain in her voice. Why can't people just see what's going on? You can hear it. It's not contempt. It's a mixture of frustration and, for goodness sake, everyone. Come on, everybody. Right. It's in your face. Don't be so dumb.
If you're not...
It's just brilliant.
It's like classic saying, and you can use it in a bunch of different ways, paranoid, whatever else. But if you're not frustrated, you're not paying attention, right? It's obvious. Like people should be, losing. It's just, this is, I've been saying this since COVID, but everything that continues to happen, I've never seen a more obvious situation where it's like, the COVID illusion was blatant. We're at a point where it's like, even the science later showed what they said it didn't, kind of a thing, and they're still saying trust the science. It's amazing how obvious this all is. And I don't know whether that's an indication of the fact that they feel they need to rush this in, whatever that means to people, some agenda from the hierarchy enslaving you, or we're supposed to see it. I don't really know, but everybody seems to see this, like this, how blatant it is, like the lies and the collapsing of their power and their influence. It's wild, man. But I'm glad people are seeing it.
It is wild. That's the best way to describe it. It's so wild. What's even wilder is why not enough people are up in arms against it and have fire in their belly, and are outraged and go, what the frack is going on? How bad do things need to get for people to wake up from the slumber? And I just think they've just done such a good job of making us numb, numb. And also just used to being downtrodden. I don't know if you know, but there's a movie called Django Unchained. And it's about this American slave. And at one point, he goes up to this cart, which has got a cage in the back, and there's some slaves in there. Anyway, he kills or disarms the slave owners. And he opens up the cage door. And he says to these guys, come on, out you come. You can run for the hills now. You can be free. And they don't. They don't. Because the slaves are conditioned to just accept their position. And actually, running away from that is scary. The unknown is scary. They'd rather suffer in what they know than go out and be free. And I think that applies to a lot of us.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Same thing with chickens or many different animals for that matter. But, they people don't really know this for the most part, but like when you buy, eggs that are free range, most of that only means that they open the cage door for so many hours a day, which people don't even know that not most of them don't even leave the cage because they're so, and it's just, it's a mental thing, and a little bit a different point, but same kind of concept of just the way that, we perceive things. Like another analogy is with elephants, where they have a little stake in the ground that they use for baby elephants, right? And it's just, normal little stake and so on, and they grow up and they end up not really pulling because they remember a time when they couldn't remove it, but now they're these huge animals, but this tiny little stake holds them in the ground. It's like an analogy, and the idea is just that, we have the ability, the power, the wherewithal to actually just change our situation, but we stick with it, and it's the two-party illusion, any number of things, whether that's fear or lack of understanding, that you can just yank that stupid thing out of the ground, Sad.
100%. But I want to ask you something, if you don't mind, because I might need your advice, because you've been censored left, right, and center, deplatformed, demonetized. You know, I mean, just to give you an example, I got an email from YouTube yesterday, and this email goes, I'll read it out to you. Your channel has lost access to advanced features. To keep our community safe, we limit some of our more powerful features to channels who have built and maintained a positive channel history or who have provided verification. As of now, your channel doesn't have sufficient channel history, so it's lost its advanced features. This may have happened because your channel did not follow our community guidelines. Blah, 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 blah. To restore it, you need to build positive channel history by following our community guidelines. And the funny thing is, dude, I've been given a first strike already. I've had 2 videos taken down without a strike, and then I had a 3rd video taken down and a strike applied. I haven't posted anything on YouTube for a while, several weeks, because I've given up. Like the one that I got a strike on, I mean, it was a podcast on homeopathy, dude, homeopathy, and I got a strike for it, right? And I've not even posted anything, and I get this message, and I'm like, what the hell? And people keep saying to me, "Oh, you should monetize. You should go on YouTube. Look at Dr. John Campbell. Look at Russell Brand. Look at all these people." And I go, "Yeah, how do these people stay on there?" And I know there's been this big hoo-ha about Russell Brand, but he's only made more money. He's gone to Rumble and monetized. He had this platform and all this attention. You know the saying, no media attention is bad. No media is bad. No publicity is bad publicity. So basically, being in the public eye is actually good for you. The funny thing is my cancellation, is not, no one has picked up on it. No one. I've got no support, no backing, and I'm being censored. How have you managed? Like, what has your history been like? And how have you managed to circumnavigate around all this?
Yeah, when you were telling your story in the beginning about how upset you are about where this is and what's being done, and that really, to me, from my perspective, some empathy, I feel like that would be feeling helpless, right? I mean, that's what it is to me. That's what makes me feel like, we don't have any control over our situation, even though, and so that's the hardest part for me. And so I guess where I'm going with this is that when this first happened to me, and I mean, like I said, going all the way back to AdSense and dumb little things like that, which what I was saying then, by the way, was just that it was a blessing in disguise, because all that time ago, it made me realize that I'm not going to go in the classic direction, right? I'm not going to go in the, Google AdSense advertising direction. So all the way back then, it set my path on the donation model, which thank God. But past that, I think the biggest one at that point in time was when my first YouTube channel was deleted, which was 100,000 followers or more.
Wow.
Just yanked, and the point was, you get built around these things, right? So you whether you want to or not, you kind of build around what's working, and all of a sudden they yank this thing out, and you just go. A lot of people just give up at that point. Because you feel it's helpless. What are you going to do? And it's not just like 2 steps back, 1 step forward. It's 150 steps back. You know what I mean? And you're like, it's the feeling of having to rebuild something like that is almost impossible. So my point was that I just decided to keep going. And I think James Corbett and I talked about this many times, and we both had talked about this we warning our audiences. This is coming. This is coming. They're going to do this. Well, eventually, I'm not going to be here anymore. So prepare, and so on. And I guess my point was at the time was, I'm glad this is behind me now. Right. So now I can move forward and, put that behind me. But then, of course, it becomes everything else. And I get censored on Twitter and Facebook and Venmo and PayPal and Patreon and LinkedIn and literally everything else you could mention, which is just, I don't know anybody else that's been censored on literally that many things, well beyond just so many platforms for so long. And, it's crazy to me. GoDaddy, things like that. Like, it's just crazy. But, I guess my thought process is that, this is important, obviously. What you're doing, what we're doing here, this is very important. And I just decided to try to make this what I do for a living. At the time, I wasn't necessarily of that mind. It was something I cared about, I was passionate about it. And at some point, I just made that decision. And I think this is who I am, that when they do that, it only makes me determined, even if it's at my, to my detriment, to push even harder. Like, that's who I am at the core, Oh, you want me to stop? Well, guess what? That's going to make me to work 10 times harder, because that means it's important, or at the very least, I just hate that you don't want me to do it. I'm very contrarian in that sense, and I think it paid off in that people saw that, my audience believed in me, and they started donating in that way. And I think I've built a model that is in a large way nearly censorship proof, because people will donate directly, whether through the mail or anything else. And I think that's just where I am today, and it's an unnerving situation, because what if they yank my bank account next? What if they do this? And it's at some point that is probably going to happen. It's just got to keep pushing, because this is important.
They froze my bank account, my podcast bank account in the summer. And then I made a big hoo-ha on Twitter, and then they unfroze it. I'm like, I'm a nobody. Like, I am a nobody. I'm nobody. And I've literally just come out of nowhere, because I was a traditional orthopedic surgeon just doing my job, awake to certain things since 9/11, and then getting increasingly awake to big agra, big food, big pharma, and then even the vaccines during pandemic. That's the only time when I really started thinking, what's going on here? I've been vaccinated to the hilt. My kids have been vaccinated. I totally regret that now. But what I'm trying to say is I'm pretty just, like a normal kind of guy, normie, who just suddenly one day was like, what the frack's going on? And started questioning things. And I'm telling you right now, I now know why we're doing this podcast today. I mean, the listeners don't know this, but we were meant to be doing this yesterday. Dude, I know why we're doing it now. Do you remember I told you everything happens for a reason? And I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. Because yesterday, I was actually in a good mood, waiting to talk to you. It was only after our scheduled thing, then I spoke to the accountant, and this, that, then I had my Twitter space, and I heard what Andrew Wakefield said. And then and you nailed it. I was feeling helpless. I was crying because I just felt helpless. Like, everything I've built has been taken away from me. Like, I knew that I was going to get into trouble with the authorities, but I thought it was going to be prolonged, protracted, and, it was going to over a very long period of time. What I didn't think was they're literally going to pull the rug from beneath my feet, and I'm at the abyss.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for that. I know why. Can I tell the listeners? You had the podcast on a different day, and so we missed it yesterday. But you were like, hey, we can do we can do it tomorrow. And I was like, yeah, it's cool, man. Everything happens for a reason. I know why. Because we can talk about what happened now last night. And I needed to hear you tell me this, because you're giving me hope. Because, yeah, I was feeling very helpless. Yes, I was like, I just want to pack it all in. I need to find something else. I mean, honestly, it's getting to the point where I'm literally thinking, do I need to drive an Uber? What do I need to do? How do I keep going? But it's this show that I'm doing that is clearly such a threat to them. And I just need to keep fighting and pray like you, that my listeners, feel like they want to donate to me and support me. Because right now the problem is it's a tiny fraction of what I need. But maybe it takes time. So can you just give me some hope? Like what time frame does it take? How, should I just be patient? Just, ride out this rough patch?
That's the hard part, man, is that it's a grueling process. And that's the thing, is that, you can build enough, to have some new rug pulled, and so, but the point is, the positive side of it is that there is an unbelievably large, it's, in my opinion, the vast majority of people that are desperately thirsty for things just like this. And they show that, they don't, the establishment doesn't want you to see that, right? So they want you to think it's impossible, but clearly it's not. Clearly, this is the largest growing industry in the effing world right now. You know what I mean? It's gigantic. And they know that. That's why the corporate media is, 30 seconds ago, it was all a bunch of fringe conspiracy theorists on YouTube in their mother's basements. And then all of a sudden, look at that. They're all desperately trying to carve out their corner of YouTube, right? It's obvious that they saw that ahead of time, But so people will believe in you if you believe in them. And I think the important thing, the reason, when you said I'm a nobody, well, I disagree with that. I think the reason that they're so afraid of what you're doing, or people in your position, is because you're honest, because you're just an average person, that, like, in the sense of, you're not some trust fund baby or some CIA connected internal, entity that's, like, there's far too many people that are tapped right into the mainstream, which doesn't necessarily prove that they're compromised. But in my opinion, the thing that scares them the most is the objective to a fault, nonpartisan reporter. I make this point all the time about somebody like James Corbett. James Corbett is somebody that anybody in this field knows who he is. Very well versed on his excellent research that is like a foundational cornerstone of so many things we talk about. And yet, isn't it strange how you never see him on any of these large shows that all know very well the work that he's done? It's because he is objective and aggressively nonpartisan, and they don't like that. Like this, the game is not built for people that step outside of the partisan game, right? We're not allowed to play. But as I've said lately, I want to change that game, right? And I think that's what people like us are here to do, and people want that.
100%. I think people do want that. You only censor when you've got something to hide. So I did a vaccine space last night on Twitter /X. And, I did actually invite people who were pro-vaccine. Not only did they not decline, they didn't even bother replying to me. And the funny thing is, these are the same people who advocate aggressively for people like me to be censored and ridiculed and investigated. Right. So, but when it comes to open debate, like, seriously, let's just have a grown-up conversation. They're nowhere to be seen. And that in itself, to me, is a big tell. That's a tell. Like, what's your problem? That you're not even willing to bring your argument to the table in an open manner. Like, the way you deal with it is to have someone, like, literally have a sack put over their head, tied up and put in a lorry and just driven away. Like, that's mafia gangster style. Like, come to the table in a grown-up way and have a chat and explain your position and argue it out. And whoever's got the best argument will win. And the fact that they're not willing to do that tells me their argument is flawed. Their argument is not there. And I think people are beginning to wake up to this and start seeing there's some serious problems going on. I think I was a nobody. I am a nobody, but I think you're right. I think the reason why they've come at me so aggressively is, where are the doctor voices, like the authority voices? There aren't any. And if a doctor does speak up, like, people are going to listen to them. Even, a dumb orthopod, foot and ankle surgeon like me. They're going to be like, hey, but he's a doctor. He went to med school. Like, why is he saying that? That's interesting. And that was a threat to the establishment. They don't want a doctor questioning. And they also don't want other doctors questioning. So then they're going to make an example, Soviet-style show trials. The decision's been made. Ahmed Malik is going to be decapitated. But let's really make it clear to everyone out there that if they want to do anything like Ahmed Malik, that's what's in store for them. So you suddenly get everyone silenced. I grew up, I don't know how old you are, I'm 48. I grew up in the 80s. I was very much an 80s kid. I loved watching American movies. I love it. War movies and the Soviet era and the communists, and you learn about the dissidents out there. I never thought in 2023, living here in the UK, I would think of myself as a dissident.
I think that's wildly important. It's funny how these words over time become like bad words. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. I'm sure there's plenty of examples where it's not. It's like, quite frankly, whether we get into this today or not, but there's words that Palestinians use frequently that are regularly misinterpreted as something that they don't necessarily always mean. There's plenty of words in the world that are like dissident, for the example I'm making. It's interesting that becomes in a time when resisting the narrative, which is we're an authoritarian time, then dissident becomes a bad thing. But weird how when it's when you're putting the lens over here, when you're going, oh, those are freedom fighters, when in reality you find out that they're the worst people supported by the West. The point is, they're just freedom fighters. They're the dissidents, which is good now, and really all it means is, resistant to the kind of accepted political or governmental, like, you could look at it, I forget what the exact definition means, but it's, there's different versions of it, but resistance. You know what I mean? Like, you're just a dissident in the sense of the kind of established political governmental stat. And why is that a bad thing? Isn't that what we pretend we're always supposed to be doing? But, where's the media pretending their job is to speak truth to power? Clearly, they don't do that. I think it's important. And that's actually why our pirate stream show, now called the Pirate Stream, it's dialectical dissonance. The point is about finding, you resist the dialectic, to resist the narratives they're putting out is the point, or at least just question them. It's important.
100%. I actually like that word, dissent. So well done. So, I wrote a speech based on a dream that I had where I was 98, it's 50 years from now, and we've turned things around and it's good times. Anyway, this was a speech to all these doctors. I've been invited to speak to them, and I'm still a sprightly 98-year-old, But I'll just quote a couple of sentences. One of them was, I said, "Cherish the courage to dissent, for it is the flame that illuminates the path to true freedom. And let these words echo in the halls of your memory, and when the applause subsides, let the silence remind you of the responsibility you carry. Uphold the legacy of dissent, for therein lies the essence of enduring freedom." So it's a little dream I had. So I wrote it down on my Substack.
Nice.
Anyway, can we
I love it,
talk about some other issues? Like so I've heard on the chatter, and I've listened to you and Whitney talking about, another 9/11 2.0. I feel like something's around the corner. I feel like we're moving towards something, and far from getting them on COVID and the pandemic and heads rolling, people being held accountable. You have to give kudos to them. They're so well-oiled machine. They've planned it out in advance. They've got limited hangouts. They've got little fake people coming out giving snippets of truth, but really, distracting people from the real essence of the problem. I've had people on my podcast, and like Ed Griffin, and to me, it's all linked. So, the central bankers and their fiat money system and their Ponzi scheme is a ticking time bomb. I mean, it's well overdue. The financial system is just not viable. It needs to crash. And they know that. Derivatives, that's right, worth, multiple times the world GDP. It's just a joke. They've stolen so much wealth, and, they're running out of chairs, the musical chairs. There's no more chairs, and a lot of people are left standing. So, you've then got big pharma corruption, you've got this and that, and it's all about profit, greed, making us sick, making us dependent, making us compliant, not having true democracy, moving everywhere, whether you go left or right. I hate these constructs. They both go towards totalitarianism, where a very small oligarchy, a very capitalist, predatory class, using collectivism and for the greater good, subdue the rest of us into eternal serfdom. This is where we're heading. And all these crises that we see are to sap our morale, to make us just hopeless and helpless, and drive us into these pens that they want us to live in, mental and physical. Now, what do you think about this kind of digital crisis that they're kind of like engineering? Do you think there's going to be something like that where they're going to usher in, their CBDCs or their digital IDs? I mean, what is happening? Because I just feel something's around the corner, and I just haven't got my finger on it.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that it's not really up for debate, right? I mean, they're openly telling us this is going to happen, right? So the question really becomes whether that is a ruse for something else, which I don't think, or what they won't be able to make it happen, because they're literally telling you, like, we're going to go through this transition, CBDCs, digital infrastructure, all of it, immunity passports, excuse me, social credit, these are things that are all publicly being discussed. Maybe they don't use the term social credit, but in some cases they have, but it's all being presented as the necessary next step, right? And they'll even in some cases make it clear, as best they do, it's usually not that clear, that it's going to be uncomfortable, right? There's going to be some issues. There's going to be some turbulence, and it's all for the greater good, as you said. This has been openly put out. So my thought is that it's really about a matter of when this gets executed, because of course, even though they're going to allude in some cases to the fact that it's going to cause your life to be more difficult until it gets better, so they say, I still argue that they won't ever want to make it clear at that moment that turbulence is because of their choices. So it's always going to be something, some kind of an action that drives their, the whole forlorn hero, like, oh, we have to do it because X, Y, and Z. We got forced into it. That's what's going to happen. And that, to me, that would probably take the embodiment of, like, we already saw one example during COVID-19. The push was all about illness and pathogens, and we have to make sure we have vaccine passports. And to do that, we have to have a digital ID. What do you know? It all worked out. Then, of course, we drift away from the COVID illusion, which is still going, by the way, as you well know. It's not going away. In fact, it's only building in the background. We're just not looking at it as we were before. But now I made the point in my show yesterday, actually. Okay, here's another example of what they're already pushing. Look at all the immigration. Look at the problem of these different, the migrants and all this different. Look at, what's going to happen to all the 2.5 million people from Palestine when they force them out, as we all know they're trying to do. And they're already rationalizing that we need some kind of a digital infrastructure, right? EU already put out articles. The DHS already put out articles saying, here's how we solve the immigration problem. And it's like, now, and I mark my words, whether it's this or something else, you're going to have the very same people, whether it's left or right. In this example, it's a right example, where 30 seconds ago, they were screaming that we have to stop the Great Reset. We have to stop digital IDs. Except, now we frame it around immigration. Now we have the Republicans going, we need digital IDs to stop this problem of immigration. I promise you that's going to happen. And that doesn't speak to the majority, in my opinion. It speaks to the high-level two-party illusion pundits that push these things, that try to manipulate the rest of them, right? So that's what I see coming, is some kind of an action, an event. Quite frankly, I'll say this. I've said this in the last so many shows. I hate this is my prediction that I really do feel is coming. And it doesn't only relate to the digital aspect, but I see this coming based on a lot of different factors. And I'm not trying to scare anybody. I just think this is quite obvious. Now, we've seen all these different building agendas. We've seen the vanilla ISIS conversation, domestic terrorism, which, for those who don't know that, the term they used, it's this clumsy kind of patchwork of saying that somehow white supremacists are going to work with radical Islam to, like, it's literally doesn't make any sense, but because they both hate America is their clumsy argument. And so the point is that's one part of it. That's the domestic terrorism worry. Then you've got the idea of a biological problem. Pathogens, bioweapons, okay, and then you've got the idea of the digital aspect, the cyber attacks, and so on, right? These are all these different points of this problem. It all seems too obvious to me that at some point this is going to culminate with, let's just say, a MAGA red hat wearing domestic terrorist who's supposedly working with some kind of Iranian overlap that does a cyber attack that releases a biological agent. I mean, that seems almost too obvious, because then what happens is every single part of this comes together, and every single narrative also, it literally is a one-stop shop to complete everything they want to accomplish. Lockdowns, digital IDs, and I hope it doesn't happen. But my point is that seems like an obvious way it could go, or it could be multiple events that drive in the same direction. That's kind of what I see coming from this. Either way, again, to the original point, they're telling you it's coming. So whatever they decide to do, they're going to roll this out, and it's going to make your life more difficult. And sadly, I don't think it's ever going to get to that plateau where they say it's going to be better than ever. I just don't believe that.
They always tell us, you just have to be telling you. So when you do hear it, or when it happens, it's not too much of a shock.
If I can just comment on that one point, I think it's just so interesting. And you bring that up, it's interesting that, excuse me, there's all these different elements and perspectives, fields of thought, in the independent media and so many other things. And one of the things that we should not dismiss, like from that point right there, is people would say that there's like a, whether we want to get into the like literally satanic aspect of it, or whether we just talk about like Luciferians, which is very different, right? Where it's not, the concept ultimately is about this belief. Well, not even to get into all that, but the point that you could talk about this element of some aspect of it that's like a ritualistic, historic kind of concept of secret societies, which are very real, right? And whether that then drives them to take action like that. Now, you could argue that would mean that there is some element of this that just like beyond what we understand, but you don't really even have to get into that. My point has always been this. Whether it's because they want to reveal them, like condition you to it, or they genuinely believe by showing you this, it's some kind of an occult black magic concept, whatever. The point is that they might believe that. And you can prove that in some cases they do. They believe in this kind of, what's the right word for it? Just that they believe that they have some kind of ritual that they need to achieve achieve some kind of end. And we've seen throughout history, these groups they come from, they do have this belief. So the question is not having to believe that that's true, but that they believe that that's true, and that they might act in that way to achieve a certain end. So again, back to the point, from our perspective, it really ultimately doesn't matter. It's that they're trying to do the bad thing to you, right? And that's where it really comes down to. So I wanted to make that point because often that drives people away. When they hear something like that, they go, oh, here we go. Everyone's so on guard to conspiracy theory, even though most of the things they deem conspiracy theory are rooted in very clear, provable facts. It's just sad that we're so quick to shy away from things because the power structure tells you not to look at it. We should know better by now.
Exactly. No, I mean, most conspiracy theories are actually conspiracy realities. It's as simple as that, and people just need to get over it. I mean, the CIA and media have done a great job of, making the term conspiracy theory, really dirty, unclean. You don't want to say it, and you don't want to be associated with it. So the moment you mention it, you're like, "Ooh, I'm running away. I'm going the opposite direction." But the reality is, it's not unreasonable to think that certain people in power are conspiring against us to maintain their power and wealth at our expense. That's not that crazy.
I would go beyond not. Yeah, I would go beyond that. It's not unreasonable just to say it's a basic, static, objective reality. I mean, it's not like it's so amazing that we're questioning that powerful people would discuss how to maintain their power. Like, why is that even? It's just so crazy to me that people just push back on that. But it makes sense because the powerful people want you to think their conspiring is impossible. Of course, it makes sense.
Exactly. Exactly. There's so many things that are ridiculous, though. So many things that you just think, how the hell? But the funny thing is, I really understood now the big lie. The bigger the lie, the more ridiculous the lie, the more the people swallow it. Because the reaction is, oh, but our government wouldn't do something this bad. They wouldn't do something so crazy. Right. And it's really smart. Like, someone said to you in 2010, you know what, there's going to be a pandemic based on something that isn't worse than the normal seasonal flu, and the whole world is going to be locked down, and we're going to have to stand 6 feet apart. We won't be able to visit our dying ones, our loved ones, and we'll be forced to take, this experimental toxic shot. People will be like, yeah, that's a great sci-fi book movie, you got there. And you're like, no, right. It's going to happen 10 years time. And people will be like, you crazy conspiracy theory. And then, yeah, it happened. Get over it, and this shit happens again and again. I mean, let's talk about geopolitics for a bit. Am I being naive? But I used to think after 9/11, I looked around and I saw, what is going on is there's this imperialistic West, the UK, the US especially, Anglo-Saxon nations. I don't know who's the dog and who's the lead, but they're there together, okay? And they were still neo-colonialism going on. There was, rather than the old-fashioned way of doing it, the administration, everybody running the country. You've now got corporations. You install a puppet leader who's compliant. You make them very rich. You stuff their pockets with wealth. Tell them to look the other way. Keep their population under control while the corporations steal all the wealth of the nation, indebt it. Blah 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 blah. And I used to think they still cared about their countries. They cared about their population. It was proper colonialism, going out there and raping other people's land. The more I look at it, they're really doing the same to their own populations. These people don't really care about their own people. Has this always been the case? And I've just been very naive, or is this a more recent thing?
Well, it would be, an opinion. I don't know how I would, I would argue that there may have been a time where at some case there, some country leader, or even in this country at some point, that there was a different mindset. I mean, I find it hard not to entertain the possibility, especially going back to, kind of the impetus of the Constitution itself. But plenty of people argue that we are misunderstanding these things as well. But I argue that at some level, the creation of the Constitution, I find it hard to believe that stemmed from anything other than at least some faction within that Founding Fathers organization, the group, that we named the Founding Fathers, that wanted some level of autonomy and self-determination. And I mean, we could prove that in that very room, there are people that had the exact opposite mindset. We could talk about, the kind of the federal government was not the way that the what we're supposed to understand the Constitution and what the Founding Fathers really outlined. But we don't talk about is that there were people that were fighting back and forth about creating the very centralized state that it very quickly became. I argue that they ultimately won out in that room to make it the other kind of direction, this, the states' rights kind of mentality. But then it rapidly fell right back into the federal government centralization, because that's what most people that are vying for power want, centralized control. But back to the point, though, is that you could argue that at some point there might have been like a fleeting, I don't know how long that lasted, but we could, pretend that it was a long time. Either way, the point is, yes, I argue that within so many presidencies, it very quickly went right back into the other direction, right? So I think that historically, I find it hard to believe that any government or centralized power really truly had the interest of the people at heart. But you can find examples where the interest aligned government to take people from this like aggressive, a statist mindset that they pretend is democracy to something where they don't have any rulers at all. Because understand, people that don't know, anarchy does not mean chaos. It means no rulers, not no rules. There's a reason that they misrepresent anarchy. It's the only ideology that has no place for their ruling structure. Big surprise, right? But so I think that's where we should be going. But anyway, the point is, I do frankly think that most of these governments are always in the game of pretending that they care. Even groups like there's people right now that might play the game of saying, well, look at Russia and look at the way that and I will argue, look at the way that they have defended Syria. Look at the way that they have shown restraint in regard to all of these belligerent actions by the US. But does that mean that therefore Russia's government or Putin are the good guy? Hardly. It's a ridiculous thing for me to say. I think they're all, I guess the point would be, if given enough time and power, and all of a sudden Russia becomes the same thing that the US is today, in my opinion, they would be the same damn thing. And I think that's the problem. So we need to get beyond this choosing your savior, whether it's an individual or a government, and get past that back to where I think we could be maybe at some point in human history. But, again, these things are so abstract for most people. They're thinking about the next election. So this is, they've locked it down pretty well.
Dude, I don't know if I'm listening to myself or you right now. I swear to God, I'm wearing my hat, but you got the same haircut as me. I just don't have a goatee. When I have a goatee, I look like I either look like a Mexican drug cartel guy or a terrorist. So I keep it clean shaven. So I've got this, but I got the same haircut as you, and I'm struggling to stay. Is this guy talking or is it me? I go on about the same thing about the anarchy thing, dude. I'm an anarchist, but not like the way they want, tear it all down and burn all the buildings and, not that kind of anarchy.
That's not what anarchy means, right?
Exactly. I know, right? But they want you to think anarchist is someone who just wants complete disorder and chaos. And it's no, no, that's not what it's about. I don't want to be ruled. I don't want to be governed. I do not want a government. I am free. I am sovereign. Do you know what? Simple stuff. Don't do any harm and take no shit. I'm not going to go do anyone any harm.
And that doesn't, right. And that doesn't have to overlap with the kind of sovereign citizen discussion. People have been created, the government has put everyone on guard to that conversation. Now there's a valid conversation to be had about that mindset. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but there's a whole movement about the sovereign citizen kind of discussion. Now that's its own thing. But it doesn't have to be the same. All we're really talking about in regard to this is, the idea that everything, by the way, could be exactly the same as it is today, minus a government invisible hand acting like they're guiding everything we're doing, and it's just a misinterpretation of how we think things actually run. The joke I always point out that James Corbett and I have laughed about in shows in the past is, where they say, who's going to build the roads? It's you are the same people that build it right now. Nothing changes other than the illusion that you're somehow needing the government to dictate what happens. It's the same construction workers, the same cement maker, it's the same people, right? The government that sit in their buildings and act like they're dictating this stuff. Yes, there would be problems that would arise. And I've had it takes hours to flesh out these conversations to make people understand that everything just wouldn't cease to exist and collapse the moment that government ceased to exist. That's why I always laughingly go with the shutdowns. Good, shut it down. Let it be shut down forever. That sounds great. We don't need them. Let people see that we don't need them. It's just, I wish people could ask these questions.
It's the ultimate Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. The government doesn't make anything. They're full of bureaucrats who are not very smart. It's a system that just feeds itself and gets bigger and bigger and more bureaucratic and wants more and more power and more control to justify it. And it gives this illusion that it's important and relevant when actually it's not. It's a hindrance. It's a parasite. So I'm totally with you there, and everything will carry on. It's funny how humanity has a, really amnesia. Like, we forget so much. We forget the fact that, passports didn't exist over 100 years ago. People could just go anywhere they want. Like, but you know what? If you wanted to travel, you need to make sure you got enough money in your pocket so you can travel and get to where you go to and can take care of yourself. Like, and if you haven't, well, you better stay put. You better stay where you are. There weren't passports. There wasn't income tax. The government wasn't taxing you left, right, and center. Over here, it's just ridiculous in this country. I've kind of done the maths, and I think by the time you die, like, seriously, for every dollar or pound that you earn, 95 cents of it literally goes back to the government. Like, you put a little bit of money aside for your pension, and that's from the money that you've earned. They take that pension from you, give it to the government. You say, right here, it's like a tax. Here, I'm giving it to the government, this pension thing, and my pension contribution. And then when you get the pension, like 30, 40 years later, you have to pay tax on that. And it's like, but that was my hard-earned money that you took from me. And then there's inheritance tax, then there's sales tax, VAT, income, cancel. It just goes on and on and on. And your fuel tax. And it's just like, what the frack? We are serfs.
My dad went through that.
What do you mean?
My dad went through the same exact thing. Like, where and to your point, they tax it more than once, right? So they tax it in your paycheck, right? And the whole point is this is supposed to come over here and wait for you because you earned it. And then they tax it again. And even crazier, my dad retired and he had his pension, he had his Social Security, he had something else. And they literally told him, oh, you can't have both. And it's like, what do you mean you can't have? So you let me think this and build it the whole time. And now because, what right do they have to say you don't get both of these? Because it's just a bureaucratic block. You just go, well, we just randomly decided you can only have one of them, and all that is a way to scoop up more money for themselves. And they have no right to do that, or taxing it twice. It's a scam. Like, these people are criminals, like, by every sense of the word.
100%. That's what people need to understand. These people are not, the government is not a paternal, caring organization that loves you and will look after you and is your safety net. No, they're the jail keepers. They're the mafia. They're people like, stealing your money and making you live in this miserable state. I mean, we could be in such a better place, the whole of humanity, if they weren't there. Like, people need to understand, like, not all, like 99% of all the problems we see and that we're suffering isn't because some guy down the road hates us and wants to take our money, or some immigrants come over, or some Muslim is there, or some Zionist is there, or whatever, or some guy, an axe murderer, is hanging around in the woods. Actually, 99% of the problem everywhere is because of our governments, because they're the criminals. They're the ones stealing from us, making us fight amongst each other, making us hate each other, dumbing us down, feeding us shit, making us dependent on the sick care system. 99% of all the problems come from the governments, not your fellow man. But we've got to a point where they've done the best freaking magic trick, where they've convinced everyone to fear their neighbors and their community and love the government. If that's not the ultimate, like, Stockholm syndrome, I just don't know.
Right.
And I just hope with time, people will wake up to it. What do you see in US foreign policy, like a recent example where you can just call out their hypocrisy? Because I'll be honest with you, I find it incredulous that America can just say things like, oh, I'm just like, in Russia, right? I'm not any Putin lover, but they'll be like, oh, Russia is invaded and it's blah, blah, blah. Look how terrible it is. But at the same time, we're giving billions of weapons and money and arms to Ukraine. Like, we're emptying all the ammo warehouses across Europe and in North America. If that's not overt supporting another country in an indirect war, I don't know what it is. But then you've got things happening in the Middle East and there's no evidence whatsoever. And they go, look, Iran is helping. And it's like, where? Like, the leader might have said something in a supportive manner and said, we don't like people being persecuted and bombed. Where's that, this physical support, and where's the evidence of any, real involvement? So it's the hypocrisy in this. It's the doublespeak I see everywhere. America can control 1/3 of Syria illegally, illegally, where all the oil is, and be stealing all the oil. So not only are they illegal occupiers, they're robbers, they're criminals, and no one says anything. And then they can go around pointing fingers at other bad actors. It's just, I don't know about you, but I just go, what the heck, man?
Yeah. I truly think most people see it. I do. I think most people see it today, and I think that's why they're reeling in the narratives right now. People aren't buying what they're selling, and it's obvious stuff, right? I mean, like, to your point, I mean, you can only push so far, just the bad guy narrative, right? Where it's all like it's the joke people have been making lately around Israel and Gaza, is that when they do it, it's terrorism, and we do it, it's counterterrorism. Even though it's the exact same identical thing, right? It's like that's the game that's played. Or to your point exactly. Okay, so you claim Iran is supporting them. To your point, you can't even prove, other than saying I support their plight, that they're doing anything. But the point is, even if they were, how is it any different than you funding that side, right? It's the point I just made. It's because Ukraine, good guy, Iran, bad guy. That's it. Like, we're not in kindergarten, right? People aren't that stupid. But for a long time, these things have floated because, people got cowed along by the partisanship and the shouting people at the top of these conversations. But it's not working anymore. Not really. People are starting to push back on these things. And the real point of it is, like, going back to Syria, for example, Iran is an ally of Syria. In fact, along with Russia, they're one of the only groups allowed to be in Syria. Not U.S., not Israel, both groups which are illegally occupying parts of Syria. And we act like it doesn't matter because they say, oh, but they're terrorists. That's it. That's the conversation. Doesn't matter about international law. Doesn't matter about all the things we can prove, all the different times they've exposed the fact that, no, it wasn't Assad. It was, in fact, U.S. elements or U.S. itself creating the false flags of Carlo Del Ponte from the UN, or Robert Fisk from the Independent, or any number of people that literally went to the ground and was like, nope, they're lying. And we just keep going forward. It's tired. People are not falling for it anymore. And, right now with the bigger discussion going on, it's so obvious that it's jarring people free from the illusion. And so that's why I worry about some other thing coming around. But yeah, I mean, I think that the inconsistencies and the hypocrisy and double standards are shocking right now. Like even in regard to like the UN in general, right? So they're literally calling on the UN to do things in every other dynamic, but except all of a sudden the UN starts acknowledging what Israel's doing, and suddenly they become Hamas. Which is really what they're saying. Oh, they're just Hamas. The UN is now Hamas in the narrative from Israel, or you're a racist.
Oh, wow.
That's the two arguments you get today. It doesn't matter about facts. Doesn't matter what you can prove or how many times they've been caught lying. You're either racist or you are a terror supporter, or you support Israel. That's the three options you get today. It's just silly.
Mate, that really cuts down to the bone for me. So I don't know if I told you, but I was clinging on to my clinical practice. But about 3 weeks ago, a large central hospital in London, the Princess Grace Hospital, suddenly emailed me and said, you're suspended. It's come to our attention that you posted a clip on your Instagram account with an interview with Ava Bartlett. And what she said could be taken out of context, and it could be offensive to our staff and members of the public. So we're launching an investigation, and we're suspending you with immediate effect. And I'm like, hold on 1 second. Like, I've not said anything, even in this clip. My guest has the right to say whatever she likes. I have the right to give her a platform, because that's what free speech is about. It's my personal Instagram account and my goddamn podcast. What's it got to do with you and the hospital? Who are you to investigate me about this? Who are you to suspend me and kill off my livelihood? What the frack is going on here? And I didn't even take a position. I've actually made it clear on social media that I'm not pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian. I'm pro-humanity. And I actually agree, though, what's happening in Gaza is just awful, awful. And there's no excuse for what's going on there. But, I'm not taking sides because that's exactly what they want us to do. And I actually would argue that the people in Israel are just as much victims as anyone else, because guess what? They live in a terror state. They live in a surveillance state. They live in a state where there is no freedom. They can call it democratic, my ass, right? People are clinging on to power, are corrupt. They're getting their digital cities. They're living in constant fear. They're living in a way that they're dehumanizing others. What do you think that does to their humanity, where you're constantly told these other people aren't human or subhuman? You think the Israelis come out good in this? So they are suffering. Some of them just don't know it. Everyone is suffering. But the people at the top, the bankers, the overlords, they're the ones engineering this crisis. I've taken this position. But the world that we live in now, I've been cancelled because of that. And that was like the final nail in my coffin. And it's funny, I think things are worse now than the Soviet era. Like, dude, then you knew who the baddies were. Like, you're like, you don't talk to that guy in that brown trench coat. You know, you use hush hush tones and you don't question the government. And if you did that, you know, you're probably all right. But now there is no safe space. You know, the corporations are acting in accordance of the diktats from government and mainstream media, and the corporations are the arms of censorship. So now everyone is self-censoring. Everyone is terrified to say what they think. And if you can't say what you think, then you're not free. Everyone has to accept we're now living in a position where we're not free.
Yeah, this is the analogy of the digital panopticon, right? I mean, people are, whether it's true or not, I mean, we know that there's basically ubiquitous surveillance, but whether it's true that you're always being heard or watched, it doesn't even matter almost, because people have come to the opinion now where they think that's the case, so they act accordingly. That's the panopticon, right? You don't have to have anybody in that little center room. You just have to think they might be there, and you go, well, I'm going to make sure I don't get caught. So you're acting, you know, and that's the alarming reality. That's not freedom, right? That's living in a prison, even one that you may think you have autonomy in, right? It's still not the same as having full self-determination. But you make the point about, you know, Eva Bartlett, who, by the way, is one of the most outstanding independent journalists in the field, who's been covering these things for a very long time. I find it almost like insultingly hilarious that they would say, oh, you know, what she says might be taken out of context. So first of all, what they mean is she didn't say anything that's wrong or incorrect. We just think somebody else might not be able to be smart enough to interpret it, or we just don't like what she's saying, so we're going to say it might be taken out of context. It's just, that's BS, right? That's crazy. That's the thing that's been building for a long time about the, you know, they're not breaking the rules, but they've realized how to, like, wink, wink, work around them. Okay, so what you're saying is no one's breaking the rules, and you want to change the rules to be able to stop what we're doing. Like, it's a very, very chilling thing that they're saying, but they keep doing that. But the point is, think about the idea that right now in this big conversation, this absurd game they're playing with these heads of these colleges, which I'm no supporter of. Like, I do not support their ideology or most of what they do, but the game of saying Free Palestine means genocide, so therefore, do you condemn their calls for genocide? It's like, wait a minute, that's not what they're saying or what that means, you know. But so you get this game they're playing. What's her name, Stefanik, with her, like, her hands are trembling while she's going, like, do you condemn genocide? She's like freaking out. I mean, it's scary, you know. My point is, they would say, well, it matters on the context, because it damn well does. Because obviously, if they aren't saying something that means genocide and you're claiming it means genocide, well, that matters, right? But here, of course, now the context matters because we want to censor what Eva is saying. Isn't that just hilarious? Like, this is coming back to your point, actually, about the double standards and hypocrisy. You know, it's like, it's just so sad how obvious it all is. But again, I think that's translating into people not buying it anymore.
It really is. And you know, what you're describing there is the tools that they use, like straw man arguments, where they turn around and accuse you of something which you didn't even say. So instead of talking about the argument, you're now having to defend yourself from a position that you were never in. Or they use an Overton window where they'll discuss things they'll create an Overton window. So you're busy arguing without actually addressing the main issues. And there's so many other psychological tools that they use. And like you said, I think a lot of people are seeing through the garbage and are like, you know what, enough of this. You know, why am I listening to this radio show and my blood pressure is going up? Because they're not asking the questions I want them to ask. They're shutting down people and they're just not making sense. You know, I found that in 2016, 17. I was getting really frustrated. The TV and the radio would make my blood pressure go up. I was like screaming at it, like, what is wrong with you guys? Like, you guys are meant to be the presenters and journalists. There's no independent thinking going on here. You're just parroting the same lines and everything. So, I gave up on mainstream media around about the time when Brexit was happening because I just saw through all the BS. And since then, I've never looked back. And when I do occasionally get snippets of it, if I'm at someone's house or I hear something, I can just hear the garbage. And it's like, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I'm turning off. I'm just
Like
not
watching
listening
a
to
cartoon.
this. Right. It's just so blatant. But the problem is, I think they get away with it because it is such obvious lies, but some people struggle to believe that it is a lie. And also, they've got a vast amount of money behind them, unlimited resources and physical might. So yeah, I wanted to ask you something. You told me, you were a chef. I knew about that. Am I right? You're a little bit overweight. You're a bit unhealthy. So you turn things around. You
Me?
look pretty fit. Yeah. Am I right?
Oh, I was. Yeah, I was like, no, I don't think so now. No.
In the past.
A while back. Yeah. I was actually, let's see. So to go back even further, when I was a kid, I weighed more when I was in junior high than I do right now. So I was overweight. I was overweight when I was a kid, pretty, but not by a huge amount. I mean, so I was definitely overweight, but I probably maybe like another 10 pounds. But my point was I was a little bit shorter and I was definitely, overweight to, I would argue a dangerous degree. And
I was chunky.
I wanted to play pop. Well, I think most kids are these days. I think it's the food we're being given. It's the terrible things we're being told are healthy, Yeah. And so I wanted to play Pop Warner football. I remember seeing it. I was like, I want to do that, and went to go out to talk to somebody, and they told me I was too heavy because at that time there were weight limits for Pop Warner, and there still are. But high school, it's like good. The heavier you are, the better. But at Pop Warner, I wasn't able to play, which made me feel very insecure, and I was. Obviously I already was, and I was I was sad. And instead of, I think of this as one of these turning points in my life. Instead of going like, oh, like I'm just not good enough or whatever, I said, fuck that. Or excuse me, I don't even cuss on here, but I said, I'm going to make this happen. Right. And so I started working out. I mean, I'd never done this in my life. I wasn't a kid that worked out. I'd never done this, but I ended up bringing myself down to I dropped 40 something pounds, to be able to play.
Wow.
Pop Warner. And so ever since then, it's like my mind was like, okay, I can do anything. I can, if I just put my mind to it, I can make this happen. And so, but then of course, you get older and, that at the time, what you're talking about when you the beginning of my daily wrap up show, I was definitely much heavier than I was now. And I ended up, I didn't need really a drive to do it. I was trying before, but COVID-19 was kind of okay, here's a perfect example for me to lose some weight that I need to lose anyway. And so, I'm glad it happened in that sense because I did. And I feel like I'm keeping it off for the most part, but it's important, man. I mean, weight is not a healthy thing. With this game they played today about it being, it's a body choice. No, it's not. I mean, it's dangerous and it's unhealthy and you definitely will hurt yourself if you're overweight. It's the reality. Or you can't.
It is a reality, and well done for turning things around. So I'm the same. 5-6 years ago, I just realized I need to get my shit together. My dad was dying of cancer, and he was the one that told me, take it from me, I'm a dying man. You don't want to keep doing what you're doing. Turn your life around now while you can.
It's powerful.
It was very powerful. And I'm not going to repeat it because my listeners have heard it a million times. But basically, obesity unfortunately drives a lot of things, like cancer and diabetes. Right. And just so many problems, and it's a lie to say body positive. No, just it's not healthy for you. Just simple as that. Don't carry excess weight.
Yeah, it's your choice, right? You want. I'm everybody has a choice. You want to be overweight. That's up to you. I'm not going to begrudge you wanting to do that, but just be honest about the fact that it's not healthy, right? It's my big thing is about just systemic inflammation. Right, which leads to literally everything, right? It's if you're overweight, that's one of the aspects. Of course, if you're wearing a mask, it's going to only make it worse, right? It literally leads to systemic inflammation in its own right. It's wild. But
it's funny. It's funny. I've got a picture over here by a famous cartoonist called Bob Moran, and of a man who's very overweight, and he's wearing a mask, and he goes, "I've got COVID again. get boosted now in his brain. He's got a little map brain in his brain. Heart attacks are normal. Yay, abortion. There's a climate emergency. Trust the science, TM. Masks work. Women don't exist. Slava Ukraini. Freedom is selfish. I hate myself. Everything's Putin's fault. That's what's going through their brain. You don't want to be someone like that. You need to challenge everything. Yeah. And I say to all my listeners, like, being the fittest, healthiest version of yourself is the ultimate expression of freedom. So stay fit and healthy and escape from, the medical industrial complex, because that's the most important thing.
Right.
So when, we're going to wrap up soon, but, before I ask you my last question, what would you say would be your top health tips, like in diet or exercise? Like what do you do to maintain like your fitness and health?
I actually am a big advocate of the keto diet in a healthy way. Not in the way that most people, go eat a bunch of meat and cheese. Like that's not, there's a very healthy balance you can strike with, just a lower carb kind of healthy diet. I think that's super important. But whether you want to do a specific diet or not, I think it's just about eating whole foods, not the store, but the actual concept of natural, whole, organic, foods grown in your backyard, preferably, that kind of a concept like that. The more that, the better. But outside of even diet, I think almost, if not equally more important, is mental, being able to, I advocate for, and I often need to take my own advice, making sure you're taking walks, going outside, grounding. I often talk about, making sure your, feet flat on the ground, because these are things that are scientifically proven, right? There's been studies that prove the benefits of like the connection you strike, the energy from the connection with the earth itself, which is really powerful to think about, but things like that, mental clarity, health, making sure you're taking time for yourself, reading more often than watching TV all the time, things like this. Like it's important to consider your mental health at a time when everything seems to be attacking it. But yeah, I think it's about the whole universal concept, balance in all things. It's important.
I love that. So I had a podcast with someone called Jared Pollock, who's written extensively about structured water. And in the podcast, we were talking about grounding. And it's because, why is it important? It's exactly what you've just said. Because the earth is actually negatively charged. The ionosphere is positively charged. And, the earth is negative and we're meant to be negative. And we're meant to be getting these free flowing electrons from the ground, from the earth into our body, which actually helps replenish and sustain our easy exclusion zone water, structured water, which gives us vitality and health. It's actually quite incredible. So there is science behind it. It's not, crazy quack walking barefoot in the wet grass. It's actually...
And doesn't that almost kind of speak to the greater plan around things? The symbiotic nature of everything. Like we're meant to be doing that. Like it's just fascinating to me. Even like the cannabis overlap. There's so many things that we're like, it's clear that our bodies were like designed to work with. Yeah. That may shock people, but we have a cannabinoid system in our body. You don't have a system for everything you can put in your body, but we have a cannabinoid system, and we act like this is like the number one bad thing in the world. Anyway, it's amazing though. Clearly there's a design, and I believe I'm a Christian. I believe in God, but I think that whether you believe that or not, it's obvious to me that there is something bigger than just living and dying on this earth and fighting about politics. There's definitely something more than that.
No, I say that all the time. So I believe in God, and there's just one God, and I've given up on religion because it was too much of control for me. It was co-opted by humans, guilt, shame, division. And I just wanted to go to the source. And there's only one God, or whatever you call God. But we have definitely been created. We are a creation. And I definitely think we are, spiritual, eternal beings possessing temporary physical sleeves. That's the way we are. And yeah. I think there's more that unites us than divides us. Last question, my friend.
Most definitely.
Imagine you're on your deathbed. You've lived a very long life, don't worry. You're very comfortable. You're surrounded by all your loved ones and family. What advice would you give them before you meet your maker?
What an interesting question. I'm sure I would think of 1,000 answers after we end the podcast. That'd probably be better. But, I think the simplest thing for me is that, that I've always kind of said to myself, is don't just seek what makes, like the monetary gain, possessions, the things that we're driven to in this life, seek what makes you happy at all costs, right? And seek what makes you feel, like my mindset is, like, let's take it from like a very earthly kind of kind of perspective, is that, we've grown up and we're, you got to go get a job. You want to be an accountant and you want to make sure you have benefits and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, we understand that in the world the way it is today, that stuff can be important, especially if you got a family and so on. But I quite frankly think that the way that life is supposed to be lived is not about the cubicle and the life insurance and, all that stuff. It's about finding what makes you truly happy and seeking that out, right? And ultimately, when you say at all costs, I mean, obviously there's ways you could make that not applicable, but really just about seeking what makes you happy in I'm trying to think of a better way than saying at all costs, but ultimately I guess it's the same thing, right? Because I think that's the way that life is supposed to be lived. And for me, I really kind of try to embody that in what I do in all of this, that I've found something that I think is important. And I had an old career as a chef, and I deviated into this. I put everything down because I think this is important, and because this does make me happy in a way, because I feel like it's important that I'm fighting for something that matters, So find that in life and follow that, no matter what other people tell you. Trust your gut, trust your heart, because that's what really it comes down to. And family being the most important thing in the world.
Oh, Ryan. Brother, I needed to hear that. I told you. There's a reason why you missed the podcast yesterday. I needed this conversation today, not yesterday. Everything happens for a reason. So I was like so chilled about it. You have no idea how much I value this conversation. You've filled my heart with hope again. You've reignited that fire and passion, from that little bit of, a sense of real helplessness last night, where I was sobbing like a little baby. I've got purpose. And, you gave up being a chef, and I've given up my knives too. Again, something in common. I'm going to wrap up my scalpels, put it away. I had a good run for 25 years. Maybe this is my new direction in life. Maybe this is my purpose. Maybe this is the map, the road that I was meant to walk on. I just didn't know about it. And I'm doing it a little bit quicker than I thought, but this is where I'm meant to be going down. And I'm not going to give up on my passion. I'm still driven. And to answer my wife's question, I wouldn't do anything differently. I'd be really upset if I knew then what the outcome would have been, but I wouldn't have done anything differently, because I'm not living a lie. I'm not lying.
Right.
I'm being true to myself, and I'm doing what I believe is right for me and my family and for humanity. And I cannot just look the other way. That would kill me. So thank you for giving me hope and resurrecting my, fire. We'll speak again soon. Everyone listening, that was Ryan Cristián. I'll put his links and everything. I'm going to give you a last word before we finish. All the links will be on the website. Please give him a follow. His website, The Last American Vagabond. He's got amazing people on that. A massive team of gifted, talented people, better than anyone you see on BBC News or Fox or CNN or whatever garbage. If you want real truth, unadulterated, in your face, as it is, check them out. Ryan, last words to you, buddy.
Thanks for having me on, brother. And I just want to say how, honored I am. It means more than I could possibly express in words, that what you just said there about, it means a lot to me, man, that I could impact you in that way. And that hopefully that this, that will be, that you'll find that this is something that matters, not just to you, but to everybody else. I can promise you people watching your show are having their lives changed by the information, or feel just the simple thing that this is something that I feel is so powerful, simply by realizing that we're not alone. Realizing that you're not some lunatic in a corner that everybody else disagrees with, but in fact, quite frankly, that you're the majority, and they just don't want you to see that, So thank you for having me on and continue to do this work. And I will add too that, as much as it can be bittersweet or even, depressing to have to put that aside, and in the good sense that you're doing this excellent work here, that there may come a time where that will be needed again outside of the normal official setting. I think the world is changing in a lot of really interesting ways, and whether we have individual practices that open up in regard to like home visits and so on, or new communities that build because things have changed so dramatically, I think that someone like you is a very important person in whatever world we're trying to build. So don't think that that's going to be useless, in my opinion. I think that that's going to become important in its own time. So thank you for having me on, brother. And hopefully we can connect again. I really appreciate that.
God bless you. Bye, everybody.